Welcome back, and welcome to Focus on Health Law. This is a proud presentation of Mr. Kenneth Haber, who is an internationally renowned attorney. His main office is located in Boyds, Maryland. Today on this set of the Capitol Forum, Attorney Haber is found with our moderator, Attorney Ramesh Khurana, with a hot discussion on the criminal sanctions against healthcare fraud. By the way, Attorney Khurana is the Chief Attorney and Counselor at Law at the Khurana Law Firm in Gaithersburg, Maryland.
I am Attorney Ramesh Khurana. I have my office in Gaithersburg, and I have the pleasure of knowing Attorney Ken Haber for the last about 15 years. He is a wonderful healthcare law attorney, and I know certain clients who have been helped by him. And now today I have the pleasure of introducing him to the audience, and he is going to answer some of my questions in regard to criminal sanctions against healthcare fraud. Just to give you a little bit introduction about Mr. Haber. Now, he is the former Assistant U.S. Attorney and a Senior Attorney in the Office of Inspector General. Ken, welcome to our studio.
Thank you.
Ken, are you ready for some questions?
I'm ready for questions right now.
These are fair shots.
These are all fair shots, so they're coming
Wonderful,
from you.
wonderful. Now, as I said, I'm going to ask you questions about criminal sanctions against healthcare fraud, and I cannot find any better person than you to respond to this question. Now, what is Social Security Act fraud, including medical fraud? Can you please elucidate it?
Certainly. The Social Security Act is the basis for Medicare. And when one's talking about Social Security Act fraud, they're inherently talking about Medicare fraud as well as fraud concerning Social Security checks and that type of thing. So when you're talking about Social Security Act fraud, including Medicare, you're talking about people who are stealing from the trust fund and also from the Social Security Retirement Fund. People who do that are either getting the Social Security checks improperly and defrauding the government that way, taking your retirement money, my retirement money, or they're taking our health care money, the Medicare fund. And
What are these inappropriate withdrawals?
well,
Give me just a few examples.
few examples is people who are in prison and they're using that in order to get Social Security checks. They create fake information. They also file tax returns from prison, and they get money from the government that way. So the government's taking steps to prevent that sort of thing, but it has been done. The Medicare fraud, unfortunately, is often committed by people who are very well trained and are healthcare providers or people who have manipulated healthcare providers. I hear sad stories from various people where they're healthcare providers and people have convinced them to give up their provider number, for employment purposes, and next thing they know that their provider number is being abused and the government's coming after the doctor because he's the one who's the provider number given to.
So that means that provider number of that particular doctor is used by some service provider companies without even informing that doctor, right?
That I've seen that happen. I've also seen where doctors themselves have abused them.
In one case, I think I had the pleasure of working with you, and the facts of the case were very similar to what you are explaining, right?
I don't remember that case to be quite candid, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I know in that case also, this doctor claimed that he was defrauded and he never authorized this service provider to use his name.
It happens all
that
too
was fraudulently used.
Happens all too frequently, unfortunately.
Yeah.
They're trusting. Somebody tells them that they can have a job. They do this, this, and this, and they don't go and check the person out to see whether that person's a real doctor or not, or whether the other people working there are legitimate, and they don't check it out. They're told that they can augment their income, here's the provider number, and boom, it's like identity fraud.
This is a very good example. Yeah, very good example.
It's
Okay.
most unfortunate, especially if you're that doctor, because the government is coming after you, concerning the billings on your provider number. And you unfortunately were trusting the wrong people, and you got to treat that provider number as if it was, something sacrosanct.
Right. Okay. Now, thank you for explaining Social Security fraud and Medicare fraud. Now, let's talk about the non-Medicare fraud. What are the issues which are very important under this category?
Non-Medicare fraud is basically anything that doesn't have to do with the Medicare system. You're talking about even, car dealerships that are turning back odometers. You're talking about, and they actually have a misdemeanor for doing that. They had no misdemeanor previously for that, but back in 1976 or thereabouts, I used the mail fraud statute to go after car dealerships in a particular city.
Because that's much easier to prosecute,
Well,
right?
there was no statute otherwise,
Right,
and they
yeah.
complained that there was no statute. It was civil, and the judge said, it sounds like mail fraud to me,
Right.
because they used mails to send the titles through to the.
I've seen it. Though I am not a defense lawyer, I have seen that most of the time these prosecutors are using mail frauds and wire frauds.
Yeah, wire fraud and mail fraud is
Yeah.
the prosecutor's friend.
Right.
Once you get to know how to use them,
This is the best tool available
best
in your.
tool available, because things are either going through wire or going through the mail.
Right.
And the mailings that we used were the mailings of the title from the Secretary of the State's office to the consumer. And the people who turned back the odometers had nothing to do with it, except they caused that chain of events to occur. And they misrepresented the odometer readings.
Right.
And so therefore, they were responsible for mail fraud.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so having talked about non-Medicare fraud, now sometimes there are false statements which are made, allegedly made or really made. So can you please explain the concept of making false statements?
Certainly. Whenever you're dealing with the government, there's Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001, and that's false statement to the government. Anything that's material to the government's action, a conduct, if you're intentionally misrepresenting to the government, that's a false statement. If you're a government contractor, if you're a healthcare provider, if you're a lab who's doing tests and you're making false statements, and false statements don't have to be false in and of themselves. They can be false within the context.
Right.
So you're certifying as a healthcare provider that the compliance with all the Medicare rules, and you might actually have a true report of patient's condition, but you may have paid for that, and that would be considered a kickback. And because you are falsely representing to the government that everything's in compliance when you're billing them, that would be considered a false statement, because it's a implicit certification.
Right.
So false statements are very, very much a prosecutor's friend.
No, I agree with you, because as I do immigration practice, which is my focus area, I see that when certain applicants or petitioners, they are making false statements and which are material for the decision making process by the USCIS, and they can take that benefit back.
Yes.
Because that is the basis on which they made the decision. So that was a favorable decision. They said, no, there was an underlying misrepresentation, and they can take that benefit back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The government can do a lot of things when you're not candid with it, when you're not truthful with it.
That's right. And a very strong weapon in the hands of immigration authority is they say, oh, we just approved this petition in error, so we are reversing our decision. So they got really very high latitude and very, I would say, superpowers.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's not that different in terms of the Medicare. The carriers, the contractors pay the money out in 6 years. They can go back 6 years nowadays, and they could say, you were wrong when you put in the claim. You knew, or you should have known that that claim was not accurate, correct.
Right.
And we're taking that money back. And then those people are lucky if they don't get double punishments, or lucky if they don't get $10,000 imposed against them as a fine for each claim. So I mean, like, you know, making false statements is very dangerous when you're talking about the government.
So you are saying that the statute of limitation area is 6 years?
For the Medicare contractors to take back the money that they paid out, 6 years.
Right. Okay.
And they can do audits on all of those for 6 years.
Now, we hear about different federal programs, including Medicare or Social Security. Now, can you please explain what is theft or embezzlement under the federal programs?
Sure. Title 18, United States Code, Section 641. That's the embezzlement section.
You remember all these sections.
Well,
I'm glad.
Prosecuted under them for so
Prosecuted
many
for how many
years.
years?
8 years I prosecuted,
years.
then I was in the Inspector General's office for another 4 years, and before all that I worked, you know, with the government doing various investigations in security.
Yeah.
So in any event,
Now you are on the other side
now
of
I'm
the
on
table.
the other side, you know, but you know, it's really not the other side, because so often somebody, a healthcare professional, needs somebody to explain to the government how they got from A to B, and that often makes the difference between criminal intent and an innocent intent.
That makes the difference in the outcome.
And that makes the difference in the outcome between
Right.
paying back maybe
Right.
singles and paying back multiples, or going and getting prosecuted. And sometimes the government is interested in knowing about those type of explanations, and sometimes they're not, depending upon what the explanation is.
I know, in response to my last question, you explained if somebody does it intentionally or knowingly, these are the buzzwords in proving whether the criminal issue is going to stand against you or not.
Yeah, they can
If
be-
it is not done intentionally or knowingly, probably this person will go scot-free.
Well, they still could have civil
Civil,
penalties.
but in regard to
imposed.
criminal, like,
in regard to
yeah.
criminal, yeah, they can go scot-free.
So
But the civil can be humongous. They can
Yes, sir.
impose, under the civil monetary penalty, they can impose 3 times the damages that were caused. They can impose $10,000 for each claim. They can exclude people, and if they exclude people, that means the people can no longer do business with the Medicare program or any of the other health care
Very
programs.
severe-
So it's very
severe
severe. So
penalties.
you've got to convince them that you weren't even reckless. You know, and that's a very difficult standard to show that you weren't reckless, that you shouldn't have known. Because they say you knew or should have known. And what makes you should have known? Sometimes it's the publication of notice of a change, you know, for the first time, and you didn't have proper people guiding you, and you didn't know that, but it was out there in the record, so they can turn around and say, you should have known that.
Right.
So it's most unfortunate for people that 6 years later, they're going to come back and say, oh, we want all that money back, and on top of that, we want doubles. And we're being nice because we could ask triples.
Right, agreed. Yeah. Okay. Moving along. Now, you have explained very well the concept of theft and embezzlement under the federal programs. Now, can you please explain theft and embezzlement under private healthcare programs?
Yes. Recently, within the last 5 years, I don't remember exactly when, the government said, gee, people are stealing from the private programs, Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Aetna, you know, these are as bad as stealing from Medicare, and they're probably stealing from Medicare too. We just don't have them caught on the Medicare yet. So they've got a statute now, and if they can show that you stole from Aetna, they can show that you stole from the Blue Cross, they can prosecute you federally for that, even if, you know, the mails weren't used or the wires weren't used. The wires were used and the mail was used, but this is just another tool they have to say that you can't steal even from these private payer programs.
Wonderful, wonderful. Now, tell me one thing. I know that you have your office in Maryland. So, do you practice in other jurisdictions also?
Because we're talking about federal type of issues, I get around. Sometimes I need local attorneys, and sometimes I don't. Depends on the specific nature of the case. If I need a local attorney, I'll get a local attorney. If I don't need a local attorney, I don't. So if I'm suing Medicare, they're located right here in Maryland.
Right.
They're located in D.C., the secretary is. So, it doesn't take, a great deal of difficulty doing that from wherever the client might be located. And it's a good mental type of exercise, to say the least.
Wonderful. I tried to ask you very difficult questions, but you explained all these concepts so beautifully.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and you have made them so simple. Thank you very much for that.
Well, I thank you very
And
much.
hopefully we will invite you again to our studio.
I thank you.
Appreciate.